to Allah and Islamic Relief, as well as the MCA Social Committee for co-sponsoring tonight's event. For those of you that I don't know, which is a lot of you, mashallah, I'm really impressed with this turnout. My name is Clara. I am a civil rights attorney and the executive director of the Bay Area Office of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. And if you're thinking to yourself, why am I at a masjid on a Friday night listening to a former FBI agent? It's a unique program, and we're really excited to be offering it. And it was really born out of the concern that American Muslims continue to be visited by FBI agents for what they often call voluntary interviews. But for any of you in the room who have experienced this, and please don't raise your hands if you have, you know that there is nothing voluntary about an interaction with someone that's carrying a gun and a badge. And as if those cases were not frightening enough, and in terms of numbers, to give you an idea, in about the last 4 years, CARE's Bay Area office has represented something around 200 individuals who have been visited by the FBI. And we're just one of about 5 agencies in the Bay Area that provides those services for free, in addition to a number of private attorneys. So if we've seen 200, and then you count how many others are being visited and how many aren't even reporting, you can only imagine how many are actually in contact with the FBI. But what's more frightening than that is all of the stories we've heard about undercover FBI agents visiting our masajid, talking to our youth, riling up and frequently creating the terror plots that they later thwart and claiming victories there. And so some of you have been to the Know Your Rights presentations that we've done in this very hall. They're frequently done by the attorneys at CARE, the attorneys at ACLU, the attorneys at the National Lawyers Guild, and the Asian Law Caucus. And we pride ourselves on those events because we want to make sure that we're not doing just direct services, but that we're also doing community education. You can't get help if you're visited by the FBI if you don't know what your rights are or where you can go. But I think there's also something that people have come to expect, what CARE will say, what the masjid will say, what the other civil rights organizations will say. And so we're really excited to have Mike German here with us tonight, who is a former FBI agent. And so if you're not believing what I'm saying, or maybe you're thinking that's just what she says because she works for CARE, now you can take it from another expert, someone who's actually been inside the agency. For those of you that have not yet met Mike, we're really excited to have him here with us this weekend. He's a fellow with the Brennan Center for Justice's Liberty and National Security Program, which seeks to ensure that our government respects human rights and fundamental freedoms in conducting the fight against terrorism. His work on law enforcement and intelligence oversight and reform has been both at the Brennan Center as well as at the ACLU, where he served as the Policy Counsel for National Security and Privacy at their Washington Legislative Office until just late last year. He's a 16-year veteran of the FBI, where he served as a special agent specializing in domestic terrorism and covert operations. As an undercover agent, German twice infiltrated extremist groups using constitutionally sound law enforcement techniques. These operations successfully prevented terrorist attacks by winning criminal convictions against terrorists. He left the agency in 2004 after raising continuous concerns about their practices in the post-9/11 environment. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Mike and allow him to share with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Zahra, for having me, and to CARE for bringing me out to speak to you and Eric. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Sorry, I was asked to announce that there is babysitting available, so if you have children who maybe are too young or not interested or too rowdy for this program, feel free to take them there. Sorry.
And I love children, so I love seeing them in the room, so feel free to keep them here too. My children are grown now and are no fun anymore, so, I'm happy to have the children in the room. And it's so nice to come and see the community and see how much the children enjoy being here. It's very, very nice. And you know, the reason I want to come out and enjoy so much speaking to community groups is because I think you know, it's the fear of the unknown that is often worse than anything else. And so hopefully I can help you understand how the FBI actually works. You know, there are a lot of good people in the FBI. So, you know, the FBI has a very important job to do. Part of the reason I joined the FBI was because, you know, I wanted to be in a position to protect the community from criminal threats and terrorist threats. And, you know, unfortunately, what I saw after 9/11 was that the FBI was being led astray. And you know, one of the things, I joined the FBI after having decided to when I was 5 years old. And my parents asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I said I was going to go to law school and join the FBI. And my mother heard the law school part, and my father heard the FBI part, and they were both very happy and never asked me again, and so that's what I did. But you know, growing up wanting to be an FBI agent, anything written about the FBI, I just wanted to read. So I knew probably better than most FBI agents the history and the fact that in other national security crises, the FBI had overreacted. And instead of being a force for good in the country, unfortunately became a problem and a threat to democracy by suppressing dissent, by investigating people, not because they thought they were actually going to do harm, but because they were agitating for social change. So when the FBI, right after 9/11, started demanding expanded powers, I knew that that was going to be a problem, and that they were going to use these powers not to go after bad people, but to unfortunately target people because of their beliefs, because of their political advocacy. And I tried to warn the FBI from within, and they didn't like that very much. And it became pretty clear to me that I could do more outside the FBI by raising awareness about these practices and hopefully raise some public outrage about what was happening and try to turn things around. And I went and joined the ACLU and was with the ACLU for 7 years, and just this January went over to the Brennan Center in New York, which is affiliated with NYU Law School. But my purpose for coming here is to hopefully provide you with some information that some of it might seem scary, but the point is to give you the education so you understand your rights and you understand what the FBI is doing, and to demystify a lot of what's happening. Because when you get that knock on the door, it's sometimes really hard to understand what's happening when an FBI agent all of a sudden wants to know what's happening. You know, I think, as Zahra suggested, you know, we've all seen sort of the pervasive surveillance that's happening of this community, the use of informants in mosques and in Muslim community organizations that are sort of fishing expeditions, you know, the so-called voluntary interviews, the stops at the airport, the questions about your religious beliefs, and of course it's not just the FBI, but the other federal agencies doing this. One of the things that we get a lot of complaints about when I was at the ACLU was during these events, people would be questioned about their religious beliefs, about their religious practices, about their charitable acts, and it doesn't seem appropriate. It isn't appropriate in a democracy that respects human and civil rights for those questions to be asked. But part of this is because the FBI is being trained poorly with very flawed information. And part of the ACLU Freedom of Information Act campaign we did over the last couple of years exposed a lot of the training programs that the FBI had. And if you saw any of those, they're extremely biased materials that were indicating that Islam itself is a problem, and that this was something that terrorism was pervasive in the community, and support for terrorism was pervasive in the community. I mean, just really terrible materials. One of the documents suggested that if an agent meets a person who is Muslim, they should ask them what they thought about the Iraq War, what they thought about the situation in Israel and Palestine, what they thought about the situation in Egypt. And this was in a textbook that the FBI had produced. It said if the person answers in a pro-Western patriotic way, they could probably be turned into an informant. But otherwise they were probably a militant. So you can understand when agents have been trained with that material, why their attitude can sometimes be untoward when they come and interact with the community. A big part of the problem is something that they call the radicalization theory. And this is a theory that, interestingly enough, was actually developed in the early 1900s to suppress the labor movement. There were a lot of anarchist bombings in the early 1900s, and part of the way that this brand new organization called the FBI started addressing the problem was by suggesting that that the labor movement supported these bombings. And the purpose of this, to link the labor movement to these bombings, was to try to suppress the labor movement rather than trying to solve the bombings. And in fact, despite the pervasive investigations of the labor movement, they never actually solved the bombings because, of course, they were looking in the wrong place. And that was the type of thing that I was hoping that the FBI would be able to avoid in this new era of national security fears. And I think a lot of the problem that we see where, unfortunately there still is a lot of violence in our society, part of the problem is that the FBI is looking in the wrong places too often. And unfortunately, because of this idea of the radicalization theory, basically the way the FBI's radicalization theory works is they posited that there's 4 steps to becoming a terrorist. And the first step is becoming a believer in the faith. And the second step is becoming an activist and becoming ardent in your faith. And then eventually you move to becoming a terrorist. Now, empirical studies of actual terrorists show this isn't true. There is no such pathway. There is no profile for people who do violent acts. As we've just seen this week, unfortunately, people sometimes engage violently for no reason at all, or certainly not for any reason that we can discern. But because the FBI has this theory that has this clean path, the way they put it, they want to be left of boom. So they want to be looking before the bombing happens, before somebody becomes a terrorist, they want to already look at them. So that's what justifies the pervasive surveillance of the community, is they believe the community is part of a funnel that creates terrorism. And unfortunately, rather than using any scientific methods or using evidence-based approaches, they treat the entire community as suspect. And of course that has very deleterious effects on the community and creates fear in the community. And again, this isn't the first time this has happened. Unfortunately, it's happened to a lot of other communities. And what we're seeing happen is that the tactics they're using here are now becoming normalized. So Clara mentioned the sting operations where, and I did undercover terrorism cases against neo-Nazis and far-right extremists. And what would happen in those cases was that I would have evidence of criminal activity before I could start those investigations. So I had to be able to have a reasonable basis to say why I thought they were violating the law. And what I found during those investigations is that those requirements actually helped me as an investigator, because it made me focus on the right people who were actually doing harm, and helped me be more effective in finding the right people engaged in harm rather than people who were just expressing beliefs that I was totally opposed to but weren't actually doing harm. But by taking those standards away, which they originally did in 2001, and then did again, even more so, gave the FBI more room in 2008, they created this ability of the FBI to investigate people even when they had no basis to believe they had done anything wrong. And that's why you've seen so many investigations. In a 2-year period, these suspicionless investigations, they did over 80,000 of them. So of those 80,000 investigations, only 3,000 actually went to the next level, where they found some evidence to justify an investigation. So for 77,000 people who were investigated for no reason at all that wasted effort doesn't actually help security. It harms the community without doing anything good for security. One of the more dangerous things that they've been doing also is they have a very legitimate and laudable community outreach program at the FBI. And for many of you who were here in the community right after 9/11, we got the documents that showed that the FBI came out to make sure that every mosque in the area had contact information for an FBI agent in case they were the victims of some kind of hate crime. And that's what the FBI is supposed to do. They're public servants, and they need to serve this community just like every other community. But unfortunately, that program got twisted over the years, and they actually started using their community outreach program as a method of collecting intelligence against the community. And we have documents that the ACLU obtained that show they would come to events, be invited to events, but actually be collecting information about people who came up and spoke to them about where they traveled to, where they were from, who they gave charitable contributions to, this kind of information that has no business being in FBI files. We at the ACLU were able to recover. And unfortunately, they haven't acknowledged that this is a problem. And what they've done is create a community outreach program that is the legitimate program that does things right, but their intelligence division creates its own community outreach program that's indistinguishable to the people in the community. And they come either accompany regular community outreach people or just mimic what they do as an intelligence gathering method. And that's totally inappropriate. And we alleged, along with 23 members of Congress, that this was a violation of the Privacy Act, which prohibits the collection of First Amendment protected activity. But unfortunately, so far, the Inspector General has refused to do an investigation of it. So what you need to know is to understand that, you know, the FBI is allowed to lie to you. So when an FBI agent comes and says, I'm here to talk to you about a specific thing, that may not be true. It could be something completely different that they want to talk to you about. So you have to make sure that you're always protecting your rights. And you have a right, when the FBI calls it a voluntary interview, the voluntary part is very important. You have a right to protect yourself. You have a right to have an attorney present when that interview is happening. And there are a lot of very nice people in the FBI. I was in the FBI, and how nice I am. And can make you feel very comfortable. But the FBI isn't, the FBI is an investigation agency. That's what they do. And when they're nice to you, and as we've seen in these documents, sitting at an IFTAR dinner, seemingly enjoying the community, when they're actually taking notes and putting that information into an FBI file. So you just have to make sure that you're protecting yourself. That's why it's so important to support organizations like CARE. The ACLU is here. There are a number of other organizations where if you get approached by the FBI, you should say, thank you very much, can I have your card? I will get back to you with my attorney. Many times the FBI will just go away after that happens, and that's a clue that they were really just there to collect information on a fishing expedition or to try to convince you to be an informant for them. And if they go away, that's fine, but it's better that you're protected, because if in the course of talking to the FBI you say something that's not true, even if it's a mistake, you can be charged with a crime. It's a crime to lie to the FBI. It's okay for them to lie to you, but it's a crime if you lie to them. And what we've seen the FBI employ is something that they call the Al Capone theory, which is if they have a reason to believe that you're a dangerous person, whether it's because of the flawed training, whether it's because of this flawed radicalization theory, doesn't matter, they can find anything, any small thing that you've done wrong and make a big deal out of it, perhaps even charge you with it, because they think you're dangerous, even though their basis for believing you're dangerous may be flawed. You may have seen a case just recently of a Stanford graduate student who was put on the no-fly list, and she was incredibly courageous and fought for 8 years to find out what had happened, and it finally, 8 years later, turned out that an agent had checked the wrong box on a form. So these types of mistakes can happen. And the only way to protect yourself is to make sure that you have legal representation. And the FBI, they know the rules very, very well, and they understand what your rights are, and know that when you say that you want to protect your rights, that's within the normal course of business, and they should say that's fine. And if they do want to talk to you about something completely unrelated, they will be happy to go through your attorney to do that. So it's not that you're being uncooperative. It's not that you're somehow, not fulfilling your obligation as a citizen of the community. It's your right, and you need to protect it. and they need to protect it as well, because part of their obligation as agents is what they're sworn to do is to protect the Constitution and the civil rights of all the people in the community. So they should understand that, and if they don't, there's probably something wrong, and you'll want to make sure that you have sound legal representation. You know, I'm sure you've all heard about the Edward Snowden documents and the incredible scope of the federal government spying that's going on now. I don't think anybody would be surprised that we won't find out eventually that this community is receiving an inordinate amount of attention from those programs. So, you know, it's very important that we make sure that we stand up for one another, and we stand up as a community and say, you know, whatever the government is doing to the least of us, we all have to treat that as a serious threat to ourselves, because if we don't stand up for one another, and if we don't stand up as an entire community demanding our rights, then nobody else is going to do that for us. So I want to make sure that I take as many questions as possible, so I'll leave that for my comments, and let me just see through my notes here.